Howdy folks, Dave here at Thunder Mesa Studio, where this week got a brand new project for the On30 Goldfield and Calico layout. Now I know it's been quite a while, but some of you may recall that the Goldfield and Calico is a mashup between Knott's Berry Farm's Calico Ghost Town and Southern Pacific's narrow gauge operations out in the Mojave Desert. It's also the sister layout to the On30 Thunder Mesa line, which is right across the aisle. And you know, there's also a little bit of Tombstone, Arizona thrown in here for good measure, like the Birdcage Theater that was built by my good friend Jake Johnson. And that brings us to the topic of today's build. I've been slowly but surely working my way up Calico's Main Street here. I've got the jailhouse and Goldie's place from Knott's Berry Farm Ghost Town. And now I want to add another structure inspired by Tombstone. And that's going to go on this little pad of cork right here. One of my favorite books here at the studio is this volume called Photography and the Old West, and it's filled with wonderful period images by people like William Henry Jackson, C.S. Fly, and others. And this is a big part of the inspiration for today's build. C.S. Fly had a photography studio and gallery in Tombstone, Arizona in the 1880s and 1890s. In fact, it was just a stone's throw from the famous OK Corral where there was a little dust up, you may recall. And that's what I want to model today. Not C.S. Fly's actual studio, but something kind of inspired by it. Something that tells its own story right here in the town of Calico. Now, the period I'm modeling here with Calico is a little past Fly's time. It's actually the 19-teens, 1920s, and motion pictures are just starting to take off, with film studios coming out to these old towns to use them as locations for the westerns, the silent movie westerns, which were booming at the time. So I've invented a fictional photographer named G.S. Flynn, who survived well into the motion picture era and acted as sort of a location scout for many of these Hollywood producers. And he had a studio and gallery right here on the main street in Calico, where he was well known for his railroad photography, depictions of cowboy life, and a rather racy collection of postcards of the local ladies of the evening. So I used historic photos of C.S. Fly's studio as sort of a jumping off point for my compact little photography studio, which will sit just between Goldie's place and the Calico Blacksmith, which I'll be building in a future installment. My first step in designing the structure was to create a footprint for it that I cut out of some illustration board here. It's, as you can see, it's a pretty compact structure, just 3.5 inches along the back wall, 3 inches along this wall, and a 1-inch porch out here in the front, so 4 scale feet. Pretty shallow building, much shallower than you would find in real life. It would probably go all the way back to here on a real structure, but we don't have that much space to work with. Unfortunately, you can get away with this kind of thing on a model railroad. As I often do, I've used my laser cutter to give me a bit of a leg up on the project. Got a bunch of pieces here cut from some 1/16 of an inch thick plywood. This is basswood plywood. Great stuff. Some interior wall pieces cut from some 1/16 of an inch thick MDF. So that creates kind of a sandwich here with these pieces. And then some detail parts cut from some 25/1000 of an inch thick laser board. And these are kind of sandwich construction where you lay one piece on top of the other. And I know that even today, in the year of our Lord 2025, there are still some people out there who think that using a laser cutter is somehow cheating. But if you've ever used one, or better yet, designed things to be cut on a laser, you know that nothing could be further from the truth. It's just another tool in the toolkit, just another set of skills that you can master. And if you're interested in how I design these laser cut structures, I do have a complete tutorial video on how I like to do it using the vector art program Adobe Illustrator, and you can check that out at the link. Some people also believe that building with the laser is faster. I don't know if that's necessarily true, especially if you're designing all the parts yourself. I spent a full day designing all of these parts, and this is a fairly simple structure. It's just a box, really, and it took an entire day of work, and I can't really say that that was any faster than it would take me to cut out each one of these by hand. In fact, cutting them all out by hand would probably be faster, though the end result would be much less precise and repeatable. The cool thing about a laser is you can cut as many of the same pieces as you want, which is why they're very popular for kit producers. Now, with all that out of the way, we can actually get started on the build. And one of the first things I like to do is go back and enhance the wood grain, just using a fine-tooth razor saw blade and going with the grain. And what that does is it deepens it up a little bit, makes it look a little bit more weathered, and it makes the wood take stain a lot better. And you can see on the front facade, I've also used the laser to lightly etch in the graphics for the front of the building. And that's going to give me a much cleaner result than if I tried to do any of that by hand. Now with that wood grain enhanced, I like to go back and add a few knot holes here and there, using my hobby knife, just kind of twirling it. Now I will get some stain on all of these using my shoe dye and rubbing alcohol mixture. And I showed how I make that in the last video, the one on the Barlow Pass water tank. You want to stain both sides so that there's an equal amount of tension on the wood as the stain dries, so it'll greatly reduce the risk of it curling up and warping. And of course, you always go with the grain. While I wait for that stain to dry, I'll show you something else. I needed to prep the site here before I could put a structure down. And there actually used to be a tunnel right here. So I had to plug it up. This was the cutoff that came from the reverse loop. Came through a tunnel right here, came through Calico Mountain on the old Thunder Mesa layout. And when I spun this off as the Goldfield and Calico, didn't need that reverse loop anymore, so I had a big gaping hole in the mountain. So I filled that in with some polystyrene foam, and then blended that with some Sculptamold. And now I'm painting it all to match. I already got my base coat on there, the scenic base coat, that kind of light tan. And now I'm going over it with a dark wash. This is a dark acrylic wash, and that seeks back into all the nooks and crannies and gives you some nice shadows to work with. So I'll let that dry. I'll go back and do a little bit more blending, and nobody but you and me will know there was ever a tunnel even there. The first little sub-assembly I want to tackle here is the front porch. It's got some little steps up. That's because the town is built on the side of a hill, and where this structure sits, that's where the grade is going to begin. I'm making sort of a core for this with that 1/16 of an inch thick MDF. Everyone always asks what these are. These are called 1-2-3 blocks. Very popular with machinists. Also great for model making. You can find them Harbor Freight, other places. If you're just using them for model making, I recommend get the cheapest ones you can. They don't have to be that precise for this kind of thing, because a lot of times I'm just using them for weight or to line things up square like I'm doing here. Using some Titebond wood glue for this, which is probably what I'll use throughout most of the assembly. Now this just drops down like so. You can see I've already got the holes cut for the porch posts. I've gone ahead and put the steps in using some O-scale 1x12s, but I'm going to wait on this top deck here until I'm a little bit further along with the assembly. Now I want to glue this front wall, the front facade, to this MDF interior wall. Need a good coat of yellow glue spread evenly over the whole piece, right out to the edges. And I'm going to use the bottom and then the doors and the windows to line this up. because as you can see, the interior wall is a 1/16 of an inch narrower on each side. And that's so the side walls will slot right in there like that. Once I get it aligned, put some weight on that and let it dry for a while. I've also glued on the back of the false front. And now I'm going to start gluing in these MDF interior sidewalls. So you get the idea. I'm basically building a box within a box. It's an MDF box skinned over with the basswood plywood box on the outside. And this is a construction technique I've used many, many times before. It makes for a very strong structure. And then the rear interior wall. Again, trying to keep everything as square as I can. I didn't do tabs and slots on this one because I really didn't think I would need them, and I think I was right about that. It does make this lining these corners up a little bit easier, but this is no big deal. And then the exterior side walls go right on top of that. And those are in two pieces, because the upper wall is going to be board and batten. And then down below, where presumably the basement is just going to be these plain boards. Now I'll use lots and lots of clamps to hold that in place while the glue sets up. Now I'll come around and do the back wall, which nobody's ever going to see because it's going to be up against the cliff. And the other side wall. I'm just going to tack one of these window frames in place temporarily, just using a couple of little spots of yellow glue. Looking at the photos I have of flies, it looks like the front wall is like a lap siding, and then the sides are board and batten, which was pretty common construction technique back in those days. So having this window frame tacked in place will show me where those battens need to end. And I've stained up some O-scale 1x3s to use as battens. You can buy milled board and batten siding in most scales, but I found that applying the battens individually always looks better. Applying the battens individually means you're going to get some variation and imperfections built in without even trying. It's just going to happen naturally. Now I can pop this back off and finish up the rest of the battens without worrying about it. Not bad. Real quick, I want to show you why I like watercolors so much for weathering. In this little porcelain dish I've got, this is some burnt sienna and some cobalt blue. And when you mix those two together, you get a nice silvery gray. And depending on how much water you add, it'll be lighter or darker. And you can add a little bit more of the blue or a little bit more of the burnt sienna. So you can make a cool gray or a warm gray. So you've got all of this variation and utility right at your fingertips here. Use a soft brush. And this is going to be exposed wood down here on the bottom. So I want it to have a little bit more weathering than that initial stain created. So now I can just go over each of these boards individually and really make them pop. Now the next one, I'm going to use a little bit more of the burnt sienna, so it's a little bit more brown. Darken that up a little bit with the blue. You don't want to get it too wet though. One word of caution, because this is wood and it will warp, and We're using water-soluble glue to hold things together, so we don't want them to fall apart. And you can add a little bit more water as you go and kind of fade it from one end to the other. And you can get a look like that. I guess I can put this roof ridge beam in now. In the photos, Fly's place looks like it's painted white or light gray or something similar. So I'm using some antique white and I'm dry brushing it on because I want the look of old faded whitewash. And I also don't want to cover up the etched lettering that I put in up here. I'm going to dry brush on several light coats until I get the look that I want. Stiff brush or semi-stiff brush, get about 99% of the paint off on a piece of cardboard. And I'm alternating going with and against the grain. Going against the grain causes more of the paint to stick, to come off the brush. Going with the grain, you can blend it in and get it a little bit of a lighter touch. You see when I dry brush over that lettering, it really makes it pop out more because I'm just hitting the high spots. Trick is, take your time. Easy does it. You can put on multiple coats, make multiple passes at it. It's a lot harder to take the paint off than it is to put it on. And then the same thing on the sides. I just want to kind of scrub it on over that board and batten. When modeling old paint like this, it's a good idea to remember that there's going to be more paint up underneath the eaves of the structure where it would have been protected from the elements. Okay, I think that's more or less the look we're after. And while I've got the antique white out, I'll go ahead and paint the interior also. That's just a straight brush paint job, nothing fancy about that. The trick now is to go back over the letters with my watercolors. I got a 000 brush here. And I'm not really painting the letters so much as I'm allowing the capillary action to draw the paint down into the engraving. Using a pretty dark mixture of that burnt sienna and cobalt blue. Nice thing is, it is watercolor, so if you mess up, a little dab of water, take that paint right off. Now I can attach that front porch assembly. Moving right along here, now it's time to assemble the doors and windows so I can get some paint on those. And these are the usual layered, kind of sandwich construction that we often do with laser cut parts. Got an outer casement, and then this inner window frame goes underneath that. And these are going to depict some 2/2 double hung windows. That's what I observed in the photos of Fly's studio in Tombstone. Don't want to glue the other panes in yet because I want to get some paint on these, and then we'll glaze them and then put it together. Now, the door is real easy. This piece just goes directly on top of this one. I like to use a clean toothpick to go back and get the little blobs of glue that squeeze out. Forgot to mention, these windows also have sills. A little piece that fits down in the bottom of the casement, just like that. Also adding a skylight. I don't know if Fly's studio had a skylight, but I do know that it's something that any artist or photographer would like to have. Bring natural light in when they're working. And I'm adding a 4x6 frame to the back of this so that when it's installed on the roof, the skylight will sit up just a little bit higher than the shingles. And then there's the cornice. And the rest of the trim pieces, all cut out of the same material, this 25 1/1000th of an inch thick laser board. I've got some little corbels cut from some 1/16th of an inch thick MDF. Those just slot right in. Like that. Then this whole assembly gets glued onto this top piece. So that's all of the doors and windows and various trim pieces. And now I'm going to get a base color on all these. I'm going to use some of this Rust-Oleum. I guess it's kind of a grayish tan. That's what I would call it. This is a great color because it does a really nice job of simulating the look of the stained wood, especially when everything's weathered. Also use this color for concrete, which works great. While that paint's drying, I'm going to go ahead and make a start on the interior. Because of that skylight, you'll be able to look right in, so it's got to be some kind of interior. This is some 1/16 of an inch thick basswood plywood that I've scribed and cut to size, and now I'm staining it with one of these Minwax stain markers, which are fantastic for model making. This color is called Early American. I've also cut some more 1/16 of an inch thick MDF to act as a base for the structure, so this whole thing will sit on top of this. And my idea here is to build the entire interior on top of this MDF, and then this will just fit down over the top of it, but I'll be able to lift it off and access the interior if I need to, because there's going to be details and lighting in there and all that stuff. Of course, I need to elevate the floor so that it's at the same height as this door here. So I need to build a little box. And this is some crescent illustration board. And this has to be inset about 1/8 of an inch to allow clearance for the walls. Now the floor can go on top of that. All right, let's see how this fits. Oh, that's beautiful. Perfect. My plan had been to dry brush all of these trim pieces and doors and windows with the same antique white, because the photos I have of flies, it looks like the building's all painted one color. But looking at this, I really like the way the contrast with this color and the antique white. I think that looks really nice. So I think what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to dry brush on some weathering to these pieces and call it good. So I've got a little bit of apple barrel khaki and some granite gray. I mix those together and use that as my weathering color. Again, get 99% of the paint out the brush. Just bring out the details a little bit. I'm not going to wait any longer. I'm going to go ahead and glue this cornice on here because I love the way that looks. Next, I want to finish this front porch with some 1x12 planks, and each one has to be cut to fit, especially since I want to leave these holes open for the 6x6 posts that are going to go down through there. And of course, the trick is to cut that notch out without splitting the board. Really sharp knife helps. I've cut some appropriately sized rectangles of clear acetate from my collection of old electronics packaging. Never throw that stuff away. It makes great glazing for models. Now I'm gluing it into the windows from the back side using some Zap canopy glue. This is great stuff for this. Get all these windows glazed and we can start installing them in the building. And now I can glue the lower frames into the upper frames, or into the casement. Nice thing about modeling windows this way is it's really easy to model some of them open. Well, I don't know what kind of window coverings Fly had in his studio gallery, but I do know that this file folder material makes great looking O-scale canvas blinds. So we're going to use that. What I do is I cut a strip off this, which is the width of the interior window frame. Now I'm going to score this on the back about a 1/16 of an inch from the top, so I can fold this over. A little white glue in there. And then I can use my canopy glue to glue it to the back of the window. And what that fold over does is it spaces it out from the window a little bit. And so we get something that looks kind of like that. And the door needs a knob. So I've drilled it through and I've got an Atlas track nail. And get some CA on the back of that. And I'll snip it off. Flush cut nippers. I think someone like our intrepid Mr. Flynn would have a brass doorknob, so I'm going to use a little Vallejo brass on that. Now, those doors and windows can get glued in. Add the door frame. And the windows are pretty easy to put in. Just a little glue on the back of the window frame. Pop them in. And now the last few pieces of 1x6 trim. Yeah, nobody's ever going to see the back, but I'm putting trim on it anyway. I'll know it's there. Flynn also seems like the kind of guy who would have a doormat. So I made him one out of some 800 grit sandpaper. I'm working on the porch roof right now. And this is some 3x6s that I've laser cut, and I've got a bit of chipboard for the roof itself. I've etched it so I can see where the rafters go. You can see that the rafters have the angle of the porch roof built right in. On Fly's place, the rafters are all capped off with a bit of trim, so I'll do that here too. Now I can paint all of these porch pieces with the same color I used on the doors and the windows and the rest of the trim. And I've cut some similar pieces for the main roof. Some chipboard and some 3x6s for the rafters. I'm just framing this in. And then when this is installed, skylight will fit right in there like that. Got these pieces framed in, and I can go ahead and get some paint on these as well. I did get a little carried away on the framing because I was having fun, but you know, nobody will see it, but I'll know it's there. I want to shingle the porch roof before I put it on, and I've got some laser cut paper shingles here. These are left over from a previous project, but you can get similar ones from Berkshire Valley or Bar Mills. Wild West Scale Models also sells them. When shingling any roof, I always start with a little strip of the shingle material down here at the bottom. You know, it's not much more than 1/8 of an inch wide, and that's just to lift up that bottom row of shingles. Makes it look more realistic. I just painted these paper shingles with rattle can paints, different flat colors in shades of brown and gray, and leave it kind of streaky and uneven so you'll get a lot of variation in the. Now lining this up with the lap siding, I can glue this right to the front of the building. And I've created this top brace for the porch posts, and these are 6x6s. These little notches cut. And then I've got these little decorative pieces. So that adds a little decorative detail, but it also helps to hold these posts in the proper position. And I've got these for the bottom of the posts as well. along with these little footings, which are cut from some 1/8 inch thick stock. Now a whole bunch of things have to happen at the same time. Get some glue on the bottom of these posts. The long post doesn't get any glue on it because that's just going to float on that bottom step, because that's part of the base that the whole thing can be removed from. Now, line these up, plug them in, and then some glue on the top of this. Lift that porch roof up just a skosh. Push that into place underneath. And now, since I can still easily access the interior by lifting the whole structure off the base, I can go ahead and glue the roof on. Sometimes on these structures, I'll use a little piece of paper folded over, glued in place right here, just to bring this roof to a nice, perfect peak. Just a couple more things I want to do before I start shingling the roof, and the first is install the skylight. Now I'm making some flashing to go along the edge of the roof where it meets the false front. And I think I'll paint this paper to look like tar paper. So one right here. And another piece on this side. And there should really be a piece up here at the top of the cornice as well. And then I've got a couple of 6x6 supports for the false front. And you know, it would be easier to put these on after the roof is shingled, but it would be less realistic. Okay, let the shingling begin. Dress up the building with some signs and movie posters and things like that. And these are signs that I created in my photo editing software. I thought this side of the building was definitely calling out for a sign. And these are some vintage movie posters I found online from the 19-teens and early 1920s. You know, Tom Mix and William S. Hart, old silent westerns of that era. For the interior, I've created this little set. It's basically just some illustration board. The door is painted on, and then I've decorated it with a couple of movie posters, and the rest are vintage photographs. Some are by Edward Curtis, some are by C.S. Fly, and a few are old black and white shots of Knott's Berry Farm Ghost Town, which I thought would be a nice little Easter egg. Now I can glue this down to the base, and presumably Flynn's darkroom is back here, but the real function of this is to hide the wiring for the LED bulb I'm going to bring up here to light the interior of the structure. This is a 3mm warm white LED, and I bent it down at a right angle. Run the wires through here, and then these will go down through a hole in the layout and connect to the DC wiring bus for all the lighting on the Goldfield and Calico. It's a 9-volt wiring bus, and I just use one of those little 9-volt wall wart transformers. During the time lapse, you may have seen me put this bit of flashing on the roof, and that was for this smoke jack, which I think I can go ahead and install right now. Now I want to do a little final weathering with colored chalks, mostly on the roof here. Get some soot coming off of this smoke jack. And give the shingles sort of an old and dusty appearance with some grays. Get some age on that tar paper flashing up here. Oh, don't forget the doormat. I'll add just a little rust up here too. Okay, now I'll get a little dull coat on that to lock all that weathering in place. And a final detail for the interior, this large format box camera. This is actually part of a set that you can get from the Aspen Modeling Company. It comes with a photographer who looks an awful lot like Ansel Adams. He's not quite right for this scene, so I'm not going to use him. I'm just going to use the camera on its own. And now it's time to put all of this in its permanent home on the Goldfield and Calico. First, I'll run the wires down through this hole, and they can connect to the 9-volt bus on the back of the layout. There we go. All right, let's flip the lights on, see if they work. So where's the photographer? Well, Mr. Flynn is off on assignment right now, but he'll probably show up in a future installment. Well, the street scene here is starting to come together. There's still a lot more work to do. We've got to build the road up towards the blacksmith shop, and of course all these other structures to finish and everything else here on the Goldfield and Calico layout. But that's a lot to look forward to. A lot of new projects coming later on this year in 2025, and I hope you are subscribed with those notifications turned on so you won't miss those. You can also follow Thunder Mesa over on Patreon for free. That's patreon.com/Thunder Mesa, or on Instagram at thunder.mesa, and you can check out the resources that are available on the Thunder Mesa Studio website at thundermesa.studio. As always, a huge shout out and thank you to our Patreon members who help to make these projects and these videos possible. Until next time, keep moving forward, everybody. I'll be back next week with a Thunder Mesa video. Until then, adios for now.